Welcome to the 1 Minute Apologist. We interview the world's leading apologists to provide credible answers to curious questions.
What should every skeptic look for in the Gospels?
Well, look, I mean, first of all, you got to go in with an open mind to this. Don't assume something until you see where the evidence leads you. And it also includes not to assume something against supernaturalism before you start reading about miracles. Yeah. Let's go in and see how these accounts lay out. Have reasonable expectations. Let me tell you what I expect from eyewitnesses. And I also happen to see this in the gospel writers. I expect eyewitnesses are going to be very personal about their testimony. If I've had eyewitnesses, for example, who knew shirts really well. They knew the brand of the shirt when others couldn't even tell you what kind of shirt it was. And the reason why they knew the brand of the shirt was it turned out this woman had bought that same shirt for her husband last week. So her personal experience helped her to have insight and provided detail that others missed. I've had also perspective issues. They're perspectival. It's not just a geographic perspective where you are in the room. It's for your life, who you are, what your interests are. If you're a gun nut, you're more likely to describe the gun accurately for me in a robbery than if you're not a gun nut. Your perspective is important. The other thing too is remember that even when I get eyewitnesses' statements, sometimes the statements are virtually identical in certain areas of the account. And other times they are wildly divergent. Expect there will be places where you're going to have complete similarities, maybe even the same words will be used to describe the event, and expect places where you're going to have divergence. And finally, just remember that if you're someone late and you already know what the other eyewitnesses have said, your account will be different. I'll give you an example of this. I had a bank robbery one time where we're all standing around and I assumed that the officers who were there first had separated the witnesses for me and they're bringing them over to me one at a time. And I'm interviewing the witnesses, and they're all giving me the account. And there's a guy standing behind us, and I assumed he was an employee, somebody that was already been screened. Well, it turns out he wasn't. He was actually an eyewitness, and he'd been listening to my interviews. And then he tapped me on the shoulder. I was here too. I saw it too. I'm like, why wasn't this guy separated, right? I got to have eyewitnesses separated, or they'll give you the same story. Well, sure enough, as he's telling me his version of the story, then he gave me good details. And good details that were missed by the other people. But I had to constantly remind him to go back and start at the beginning. He wanted to kind of come in and just tell me about that little piece, and then that little disjointed piece, and that little disjointed piece. I had to remind him, no, please go back and tell me from the very beginning. And I find that late witnesses, if they're aware of what's been given to you already, have a tendency to just fill in the gaps. Now, why do I say all this? As I read through the Gospels, I saw the same attributes that I would see, and many more, of course. But I mean, these were important attributes, and I found that the later the gospel arrives, and if the author is aware of what's been said before, he's far more likely to give you an account that is really less heel-to-toe narrative, but just kind of comes in and gives you snapshots that were missed or are not mentioned by the others. And what do you see in the Gospel of John? You see that very thing. He clearly knows what's been offered earlier, and he's simply offering those things that he thought were pivotal to our understanding of Jesus that were missed by the others. That is not a reason, then, to look at his account and say, well, you can't trust it, it's too different from the other accounts. Remember when it was offered. And anything offered by a late witness who's aware of the early eyewitnesses, they are far more likely to just insert those details they thought were missed.